Hey, Deliberate Leaders. I am Allison Dunn, host and founder of the Deliberate Leaders podcast, where we are bringing you interviews to help you on your leadership journey. Our guest today is Michael Schein, who is the CEO of Microfame Media. He is also a contributor to Forbes, Fortune, and Inc. magazines. His business, Microfame Media, turns consultants into thought leaders and businesses into recognized authorities in their fields. So Michael, if it's okay, I'd like to do our first segment of this interview as almost a quick study on, I call it our deliberate conversations segment. This is an opportunity for you to share one deliberate leadership nugget with our listeners. Is that okay? Are you good with that?
I am.
Okay, fantastic. What is your top leadership tip that you give people?
A leadership tip that I give people or that I use?
That you use. Use or give. Either's fine.
So I think that as a leader, and I don't always know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's all that I've got. I really try to think about what they care about rather than what I care about. So, for example, in our company, something that we call the Creative Lab, and we have it mainly because I think it's a good idea. It means that anyone who works in our company can spend a portion of the time, working on something that they're interested in, but where this differs from Google is that you actually become an owner in this product that you work on. And also a lot of the products are artistic in nature or programs, not all of them, but some of them. But, often in interviews, if I can sense that somebody has an artistic bent or somebody is a really good copywriter, but perhaps they really wanted to be a playwright, I will not try to convince them why their dream should be to ditch their playwriting ambitions and become a copywriter. I try to show them how being part of our organization can help them achieve their dreams. So, hey, if you work to build this mechanism with me, this business mechanism, I see this mechanism as a vehicle for realizing creative projects, right? So as a result, someone's going to work really, really hard because they're building something to help them get to where they want to go. But if someone has more of a business bent, if they're more money oriented, talk about bonuses, right? And potential bonuses. So I think we all want to try to convince people to be into the same stuff we're into, and sometimes even get frustrated when people are harboring their own dreams to the point where people who are on your team sometimes feel they need to lie to you. But if you can channel that ambition, that honest ambition toward your own ends and toward the organization's ends, everyone sort of wins.
All right. So you kind of wrapped them up. So the tip is that to figure out what's important to them. And then the why is that you're getting their ownership into helping them achieve their project. That also helps you, correct?
Yeah, I think it's really figuring out what's important to them in life, and honestly, because a lot of times people will lie to you or not be totally forthright. They'll try to predict what you want them to think is important versus really what is important to them. And I think you need to uncover that if you want people to be dedicated to you and your organization.
Very cool. I love that. So on to your work. You do a lot of crafting and creating and helping people develop their thought leadership for themselves and their company. So what does it mean today to be a thought
leader? It's funny. Have the word thought leader all over our site. Mm-hmm. And I use that word because it's something that people understand. It's kind of like that old Supreme Court ruling about obscenity. I know it when I see it.
Right.
But I also think, if I'm being completely honest, it's a bit of a business buzz. I mean, I think it's lost a little bit of meaning. I mean, we use it because people often come to us and say, I want to be a thought leader, but I don't know what it means. I think that really what we're talking about is someone being looked at in their niche in their corner of the world, because there are a lot of corners of the world now. You used to have to be famous on a large scale to be successful. Now you can be micro famous, which is microfame media, right? I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, is really famous in my world, in the marketing world, in the digital marketing world, but my mom doesn't know who he is. So I like to want to get people to come to me saying that, hey, I want to be a thought leader. I try to get them to reframe their thinking, ironically, and think more in terms of micro fame. You want to be the most recognized authority in your corner of the world. You want that little world, all of the most influential people in that world, the people who follow your micro industry or your micro field, to have heard of your name and to kind of have an association with it.
Okay. Um, so I think that that seems more achievable just in general when you think about it. It's like I don't have to be the most famous person in the world, but
Right.
in my little corner. So kind of takes the scariness out of it, I think, a little bit. What do you think are the greatest opportunities that you help your clients achieve while trying to find this like micro fame elements?
Can you say the question in another way? I'm not totally
Sure,
sure I understand.
absolutely. So how are you helping your clients achieve that? What types of opportunities are you helping them craft to create that micro fame?
Yeah, so I guess I use a two-pronged approach. I really attack this from two different angles. So on one hand, something I always admit to clients or say to clients is I'm willing to admit something that a lot of other marketers aren't, even though there are a lot of great marketers out there. And that's that marketers don't know what they're doing, including me and including everybody. And so what I mean by that is that you can be really good at marketing, this thing that we call marketing, drumming up attention and turning that into dollars. You can have a knack for it. You can have read all the books. You can be really good with the technology. But the idea with something as squishy and subjective as marketing, that you can do A, B, and C and get D every single time, is absurd. Because, for example, you see all these courses make a six or figure income by, I don't know, Facebook ads plus benefit stacks plus video equals whatever. The minute anyone is selling a course on use these three social media tools to get this result, it's already obsolete because everyone knows about it. So you have no competitive advantage. Or every industry is different, or every circumstance is different. So what we do and what I do and what I've done for myself is that I start off with a hypothesis. So what is your point of view that is different than everyone else in your field, and what are sort of the mechanisms to get you there? Is it a podcast, a ad campaign, or what is it? And then what we try to do over like a 4-month period or so for our clients, and we always do this for our new initiatives, is you roll out tiny experiments. If you're going to run around with your pants down, you want to make sure that the whole world doesn't see it. You want to make sure that only 3 people see it before you realize that no one likes to see you in your underwear. You know what I mean? So we try to do a series of experiments, and we're just as happy to get wrong results as we are to get right results. But by the end of that period, that combination on a small scale that's getting you attention in your world, and then you can kind of blow it up. And then I guess the second part of that, it's okay, those are experiments, but what kind of experiments? So it's funny. I never wanted to own a business. Like that was, my father was in business. I thought what he did was really boring, even though I didn't understand it. I wanted to do something artistic. I wanted to be a writer my whole life. And then I got into music in a band that I took seriously, and I was into punk rock and that kind of thing. So I fancied myself as mischievous. And, what that taught me though, is that a lot of times, especially in like punk music and in people like David Bowie and the people I like, the market and the art were one in this, and that was cool. You know what I mean? Like David Bowie would show up late on purpose before he was famous, and a press release about all the people that were going to come. But that's into his Ziggy Stardust image. And a lot of the rock managers were. I was always interested in hype artists. People who I don't even call it marketing, who kind of played fast and loose with the rules. And that got me interested in cult leaders and propaganda artists. And I started to think early on in my career, those people are obviously the marketers. Is it that those are evil people? Or is it that some unsavory people come to those kind of techniques of mass psychology better than others because they see the way the world really is? And I realized that that was the case, that you could sort of apply those mass psychology techniques to for good things. So that's what I did early in my career. And now I've kind of become this, you mentioned Forbes Inc. and these places I write for. I also write for Psychology Today. And I write about this concept of hype, and I'm writing a book of it, and it's coming out in November. And that's sort of my thing and my area of expertise. So I conduct experiments, but they're always based on non-marketing marketing, so to speak.
All right. So experimenting, so if someone wanted to focus on trying to figure out how to build authority and influence, what would be a typical, most common experiments that you would suggest trying? I guess obviously custom to the person, right, of what they want to achieve. But what would be like the first few that you would suggest that people consider doing?
Well, I think the first thing you have to realize is that all of the technology that we often focus on are just tools or weapons. I mean, they're not,
Weapons.
yeah, I mean, they're not the marketing.
Right.
Instagram, Twitter, podcasts, blogs, standing on a street corner with a sign, billboards, whatever, networking meetings. These are all just like arrows in a quiver. But unfortunately, people focus on that first. Like they say, I got to get this social media stuff going. Well, you don't. If you knew that you could all the business you needed by having coffee with influential people, and each deal was worth $500,000, and you only needed 3, you ever spend time on Twitter? You
Not a
shouldn't.
moment.
Yeah, so that's an extreme example. So I think the very first thing you need to do is figure out, okay, who is what micro niche? You know what I mean? Who's that like in crowd of people that you need to track? And one way I do that, like let's say you decided blogs, podcasts, whatever the medium of the day is, you can get a spreadsheet and sort of all of the blogs and podcasts in your sort of neck of the woods, them across the x-axis and the y-axis, the lengthwise and the other way, and then figure out who mentioned who, and the columns and rows that have the most X by them, those are your influencers. Like my podcast may be mentioned only once, but someone else's podcast, James Altucher's, might be mentioned 15 times. That's someone who you want to crack, right? So the first thing is, who do I want to be in front of, right? And then I guess the second thing, before you figure out what experiments to do, you have to figure out what's your contrarian point of view. Like what's the thing that you're known for that you can add to the conversation that's going on, but stand out. So 2 questions I often ask to get there is, what is a point of view in your industry that makes you really, really angry, that people believe in and that you just think is wrong? So in my case, it was early in my career, Gary Vaynerchuk, who I brought up before, his whole thing was hustle, hustle, hustle. He used to say, you got to go to the toilet and tweet at 3 a.m. because that's how much you hustle. And I thought that was terrible advice, because if you're a young person and you're actually making the products, why should you be tweeting 25 hours a day? So I wrote an article in Inc. called Why Gary Vaynerchuk is Flat Out Wrong. And it launched my career, because he responded to me. So I think the first thing you got to figure out is, what's that contrarian point of view? And then, I don't know, sometimes you just got to start with the technology that's easiest and the most comfortable. I mean, if it's easiest to ramp up a podcast and you can do 3 episodes, do it. If you're more of a writer, start with that. If you're a networker, start with that. But just make it small and make it fast.
Yeah, good, excellent advice. I am intrigued on the concept of, you called the contrarian. I kind of, in my research and looking at what you help people do, is to pick the fight. And so
Yeah.
I'm to kind of just expand on that concept a little bit. So can you tell me, how do you identify what fight to pick? And can you give us some examples? Because I think what you just did with the Gary Vee one, just give me one more.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between picking a fight and being a jerk.
Oh,
Like,
totally.
I think people confuse the two. I mean, you can
That's
pick a
fair.
fight with an idea, you know? I don't think that means being a troll. Like, if you read the article I wrote about Gary Vaynerchuk, I was incredibly respectful. Reason, I mean, I think he's a brilliant business person. I think his Wine Library TV was an amazing thing. I think he's fantastic at promoting himself. I just have a problem with the message he was putting out in the world, but I wasn't a troll, and I think that's important. And um, so that being said, it's kind of like if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, people are more attracted to a debate than a speech. I mean, you see it all the time. Our president does this for better or worse. I mean, he constantly picking fights with people, and he is a bit of a jerk, but it works. You know,
Yep.
I won't go that far. But I mean, I'll give you an example. One of my hype examples that I really like. So there's this guy named Shep Gordon, who was a rock manager for the band Alice Cooper, and he broke them in the U.S., but he just couldn't break them in England. And he had Wembley Arena, rented, and they had like 500 tickets, and there was like a week left to go. 500 tickets sold. So what he did was his whole thing was that if parents hate a band, that he said everybody is going to go through a period in their life where they hate their parents, especially in the 70s. That's changed a little bit. But at that time, I was thinking, so he said, if he could get every parent in America to hate the band, and in the world, in England, if he could pick a fight with parents, then all the kids would like them. So he didn't want to get them in Rolling Stone. He wanted to get them in Time magazine as the scourge of parents. So in this particular case, he didn't know what to do to sell tickets to this thing, this show, and it was going to be a massive money loser. So he got a billboard of the singer, who's now known as Alice Cooper. That was the band at the time, naked with a boa constrictor, around his sensitive area and nothing else. And he blew it up to this giant billboard and put it on the back of a truck. And then he told the truck, make sure the truck breaks down. If you get arrested, we'll make it worth your while in rush hour. So he had him drive it through Piccadilly Circuit. It broke down in rush hour. And, that's like that's like Times Square. So there were helicopters. It was like, oh, this is a disgrace. I made this naked picture of Alice Cooper in the middle of the busiest area of London. And, every parent, I mean, Parliament did a session on it about how this was the disgrace of the youth, corrupting of the youth, and horrible. And they sold out the arena and became one of the biggest acts in England. So that's an example.
That's a great example. Wow.
And that's why you should look at these kind of people, these traditional people who have a marketing job. While some of them are good, a lot of them aren't really judged on results. If you're managing Alice Cooper, you got to get results. You got to look at these people, who think of themselves as marketers.
So I think that was almost a risky, like you're breaking down in the middle of traffic hour. So I kind of relate that to a lot of things that we do. Like you do it and you're not sure if this is going to get you the result. So my question for you is that if you're trying strategies, for those who are trying strategies, like when do we know what's the, when do we know when to stop something that's not working? Like how long do you give it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it depends on what scale it is and on how much pressure there is. I mean, if you have a list, so some experiments aren't that bold as this experiment. So if I'm
Right.
reaching out to a list of 100 podcast guests and I've tried every pitch and not one person responds to me, maybe podcasting isn't the right medium. If I reach out to six with one approach, okay, you know what I mean? You should probably try a little harder. But I think sometimes I hate to say this and no one wants to hear it. Sometimes I think there's a bit of gut involved. I mean, you can tell when there's momentum. I mean, you just have to keep your eye out for those signals. This wasn't the first thing Shep Gordon did. I mean, this was a very big thing, but Alice Cooper was already big in the United States. But when he started out, he happened upon managing this band. He was a pot dealer in a hotel that they were both staying at. And someone said, they actually said this. I think it was Jimi Hendrix happened to be staying at the hotel. And he needed a front for his pot dealing business. And Jimi Hendrix said, you're Jewish, right? And he said, yeah, he goes, you should be a rock manager. They're all Jewish, So he needed a band. So he found a band that he hated, this weird band called Alice Cooper, who were like ugly looking and like, played weird music. And he's like, how can I make these people popular? So he had this idea about parents. So, in the early days, he didn't do this thing with Piccadilly Center, but he had guillotines on stage, it's fake, chopping off fake heads. And it was in front of a bunch of like peace and love hippies. So that would get attention. So in other words, he started small too. I mean, they started out with theatricality on stage. They would try to make hippies angry. It wasn't parents at first. They tried to break the peace and love thing. And if he knew the rock press was there, he would amp up the blood and guts, So, but he had nothing to lose at that point. They had no fans, If it wouldn't have worked, if everyone would have just nodded their heads and had another beer, he probably would have used a different approach, or maybe he wouldn't be a rock manager today.
Right. Interesting. Do you have a long history in the music industry? Is that kind of your area of niche?
No. I mean, like I said, I was in a band and I'm interested in music. And the way I got interested in hype artists was because I looked at what music people did. But then I moved on to propaganda artists and cult leaders and all kinds of things. Again, I just delivered my manuscript for this book about 4 days ago. So these stories are very much on my mind.
Yeah. Got it. Cool. That's awesome. I get the tie back now.
But yeah, I was never in the industry other than trying to make it in a band and failing miserably. But
makes for a good story.
Yeah.
That's great. One of the nuggets that we picked up was that you talk about being more generous and how that serves you. So can you talk about generosity and how to build followers?
Yeah. In regards to my own career or just in general?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think the old saw about this thing that we call networking is true. I mean, I don't think there are many people who are successful who don't know the right people. And a lot of times people think of that in terms of like, oh, you don't ever make it. I don't know the right people. But it's incredibly easy to know the right people now with social media and kinds of things that are out there if you're willing to, and this is said so often, but it's true, give before thinking of receiving. So like, yeah, I think that, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, I was at a conference and one of the speakers was a gentleman named David Siegel, who was the CEO of Investopedia and then was the CEO of Meetup, and he's just a great guy. And we happened to end up at the same dinner, at the same table, having hors d'oeuvres or something. And he was just a cool guy and very much more of a corporate giant than I am, but we were just talking. And I have not, I didn't want anything specific from him, but he's a good person to know and he's a good guy. So whenever I met somebody that I thought he should know, I introduced them. Now, I didn't just fire off 7 random introductions, which is something that people do. I found out about his interest. I found out where he wanted to go in his career. I happened to know other people. So I'd say, hey, do you want to meet this person? I had clients who were doing podcasts. I just had friends who were doing podcasts, and I knew he was trying to put certain aspects of his own thought leadership. So I booked him as a guest with no financial, reward. For my clients, there was a financial reward in that we needed guests, but for other people there wasn't, and I just got him booked. So I don't know what the payoff was for that, other than the fact that in my close network is David Siegel. He's given me invaluable advice. I had someone in an organization who wasn't working out. He told me how to handle it. One day he may recommend a client to me. There have been circumstances various other David Siegels of the world have recommended clients because of this. David isn't one of them, but I have a network of people who are really accomplished and powerful around me. And that's just vital to success. And that only comes from generosity, but you can't do it in this kind of scheming way. Like one time someone introduced someone to me and I picked up the phone and goes, questions for you. How can I help you? What can I do for you? And it was like, you can start by hanging up the phone. I mean, this is obviously your tactic, right? So like anything else in life, it's a nuanced thing.
Oh, that's great. Isn't it funny how you say something can make all the difference, right?
Right, right, exactly. And it was true. I mean, he was going to introduce someone to me, and then he wanted like me to reciprocate in kind, and it was just you could tell from the minute that he started that he was that kind of guy. Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. Yes. Um, in my industry, I call it coaching and consulting. The pressure is always on. It's that you have to write a book. You have to write a book, and to build authority. And so, I guess my question is do you think it's always a good thing for someone to document their per se thought leadership in a book? Is that what you push or suggest, or like is that a key strategy?
Eh, not really. I mean, I think it depends. I mean, a lot of times people will call me up and they say, I need a book. And what I'll say to them is, do you want a book or do you want what a book can get you? You know what I mean? Because, it depends on a lot of things. I mean, if you want to be a really successful sheet metal business, a really brass tacks kind of thing, certain aspects of marketing will help you. Having a book, I don't know. I don't like to have blanket things. Also, there are a lot of really, really bad business books.
A lot of bad business books.
And it's become diluted. Now, what I will say though, if you want to be someone who is selling ideas on a very high level, I found that no matter how good you are at what you do, no matter whether you have a podcast, unless it's got millions and millions of people, whatever, if you want to get top paid speaking gigs, which often convert into business, you almost need a book. And it's better to have a published book. Now, what people, self-published is better than nothing, but a published book is better, you know, for credentials. I mean, things like that. Like they're just, and then a lot of times if you have top speaking gigs and you're a consultant or a coach or whatever, that's where the top paying corporate gigs come from. So it people love the written word. If you've written a book on something, especially if it's a good book, especially if it has the stamp of authority, sure, it helps a whole lot, but I never like to say always. It depends on a lot of things. And I think having a really bad business book, I don't know, that worked really well for a while, but people are starting to see through the ruse a little bit, I think.
So a bad book is not as good as no book, or a bad book is worse than a
Mm,
no book.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, unfortunately, I think people operate on heuristics, you know what I mean? Meaning
For
they
sure.
mental shortcut. So I mean, I don't know. I think sometimes, depending on the person and depending on how much thought they put into it, they'll see a book and they'll hire you because they see a book. Um, that being said, if you live your business life trying to produce mediocrity and surf on that, it's only a matter of time before the house of cards, I think, falls apart.
For
Why
sure.
not just do a good book or hire someone to do a good book?
Right. Is that an element that you hope that you work with your clients to create if they're producer or publisher looking to have a book published? Is that an area that you handle?
Yeah, I mean the way that we handle it is we always start with that scientific process. So we have that 4 to 5 month testing procedure, and that's got like a set, you know, investment, and we figure out what's that unique combination of tools or weapons that works. A book is one of them, but there's 40. And then after that, it's very much a menu. I mean, some people take our advice and it's more like a consulting capacity. They implement it themselves or they hire other people. But we also offer the menu, and a book is on that menu as one of the tools. And it often is very important. So,
Okay. I like how you talk about the aspects that you help are weapons.
yeah.
That's pretty funny. I've got one more quick question regarding writing a book. So, if someone decides to write a book, what's the best way to set the book up for success?
First way is to have a good book. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think the world needs another book called Leadership Strategies for the 21st Century or outside the box thinking I think you need a high concept. I mean, Robert Greene's 48 laws of power, right? I mean, I'm going to give you the 48 laws that if you follow these laws, you will have all the power in the world. And it's based on historical examples. I think another thing to do is do a lot of advanced preparation. Like, I don't think you want to have the first time you ever thought about your email list or your speaking platform or your public persona or the articles you write is 3 weeks before your book comes out. I think that puts you at a distinct disadvantage. I think then you're depending on luck. For example, I have this book coming out in November, but fortunately, I've been writing articles that are on this topic for 5 years. And people like them. Some people say I'm their favorite writer, which is a wonderful thing to hear. I don't say that to boast. I say it because I put a lot of time and energy into this. I have a mailing list that is this thing called the Hype, book list, where all the research that I've done over these years, a lot of them are very out there, esoteric books. People can sign up and get these recommendations. I have a pretty good social media presence. So, and I have a lot of connections, people like you who have podcasts and many more of them. So, leading up, I'm going to marshal all of those resources and make sure they all hit at the same time. I don't want to kind of trickle a few podcasts in. I want to be on 50 podcasts around the time the book comes out. But I could have only done that if I had it. It's because I have those connections that will allow that to happen. So unfortunately, I think you got to do a lot of things at the same time and run a lot of trains down the track at the same, time.
I think that becomes overwhelming for a lot of people, but I do agree. How many strategies? So I've kind of got a rule of thumb that I usually say like 10 minimally, right?
Yeah.
How many do you suggest that people who are trying to build authority have?
I don't think, I think it's what makes it a little less intimidating is if you sort of start early and do things as they come up. So I don't have a number, I think it's back to experimentation as well. Like I've tried so many things on the road to writing this book for our business and for me that have failed, right? Like I had this thing called cliffhanger marketing that I was going to do. We showed a cartoon that we did in Madison Square Garden, and I was so excited, and that generated exactly $0 and zero awareness, So there's all these, but that's fine. It's at the time it was disappointing, but I've done a lot of things, but like, yeah, I figured out my combination. So for me, it's only like 3 or 4 things. It's the Hype book list, it's the podcasts, it's LinkedIn. I have a strategy on, and it's the email list. But the only reason I know it's those 4 things is because I've tried a million other things that weren't as effective. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I feel you just gave me some affirmation. I feel like the few things you mentioned are also the things that I've kind of narrowed down. So thank you.
Good.
I think they're also the ones that you've mentioned are the biggest way to kind of figure out leverage, right? As opposed to one-to-one coffee meetings, which could be incredibly effective for the right person, for sure.
Yeah. But I should say, I know people who Facebook ads work for them incredibly. They haven't worked for us very well, but for other people, they're fantastic. It really just depends, it you just got to try stuff, it's got to fit your market, the time. It's there's no way to predict that, but it's better to start with a lot of lead time so you don't feel that pressure and you can experiment with things.
That is, I think my biggest takeaway is lots of lead time and just experiments, small experiments that you're fine tuning along the way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Michael, you mentioned that you have a book coming out in November. I don't know if I've caught the title or if you, but I feel like I missed it maybe the first time. So are you willing to share the name of the title?
Oh, of course. Yeah. It is called the Hype Handbook. I'm looking up right now to see if I can get the subtitle, because even though I came up with it,
you can't remember
long. No, the exact words. And I think it kind of explains what the book is. So hold on. As we're sitting here, I am looking this up.
You got it. You mentioned hype twice, so I was wondering if that was the title.
No, so it is the Hype Handbook, okay. And the subtitle, because it explains for as of now, because they don't always stay the same. But it's 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers.
Love it.
Yeah, so that's what it is.
Right, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, but it's not, but I went through history and basically looked at all of these, tricksters and mischief makers and cult leaders and rock managers and propaganda artists. And I said, okay, all of these people, what are the common sort of strategies that they've used, good, bad, and mediocre, not mediocre, good people, bad people, amoral people. And how do you reapply those for good? And that's what it is. There's 12 strategies that if you could use this as a Bible sort of to become a hype artist, to become a master marketer for anything really.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. So now I forget the title of it,
Handbook.
the Hype Handbook. That will be out in November.
I think. I mean, that's the idea. That's what they tell me.
That's what you're aiming at. Fantastic. Michael, what is the best way for people to be able to connect with you? And I also wanted you to share the name of your podcast since you mentioned that as well. I think that would be fun.
So my podcast, I'm no longer a co-host, so it still exists. Yeah, it's called Access to Anyone, and it's so great, and it's run by my co-host Michael Roderick. I would check it out. It's the reason it was a hard decision for me to stop doing it. I did it for years, and it was because I took my own medicine in terms of branding. It's a lot about really how to get access to anyone. The name says it all, and it's like hyper networking, and that's really Michael Roderick's thing, and it's part of what I do. But I realized that the thing that resonated most with people about my persona is that sort of mischievous element, that like devil may care thing. And that wasn't what this is. Really a very, very positive podcast. I mean, so I guess I was not positive enough, but we were sad about, I left. It was proactive. It was because I couldn't do everything I was doing. It was one of the hardest decisions I made because it's a great, great show and everyone should check it out. And it's pretty popular. I guess there's two ways to reach me. I mean, one is you should join my book list because that's a lot of fun. I try to be a little bit funny with it and you get a lot of great information. And will you put this stuff in the show notes as well? Or
yes.
Yeah. So it's hypereads.com/list. So HYPEREADS.com/list. So that's sign up for the book list and I'll send you that. And then our company is microfamemedia.com. You can always find out about us on there.
Wonderful. Michael, it's always fun to talk to a marketing guru, a person who's writing the book on the Hype Handbook, which is fantastic. Can't wait to see that. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me here today. And it's nice to be able to connect with people throughout the country, even though we're not out and about in our own neighborhood.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Michael.
It was my pleasure. This was so much fun. And hey, stay safe and healthy.